My name is Nora Whitfield, and I turned 70 last winter, the kind of birthday you mark with a quiet slice of cake and a cup of tea. For 35 years, I kept a small-town library humming repairing spines, shushing teenagers with a wink, tucking overdue notes under front door mats. I retired when Martin, my husband, got sick. After he was gone, the cedar-sided house by the river learned to live with my footsteps alone. That morning in Birch Harbor, Oregon, I sat in a courtroom that pretended to be ordinary fluorescent lights, a flag, the brittle smell of coffee, but felt like a ledge. My hands were folded so tightly my wedding band left a half moon on my skin. Beside me, Jonah, my 12-year-old grandson, sat straight-backed the way his father Aaron used to when he decided not to cry. Across the aisle stood Kendra Vale, polished as a storefront window, speaking as if the judge were a customer and grief a product. "He belongs with me," she said as though possession could be pronounced. The judge turned to Jonah. "Is that what you want?" Jonah didn't fidget. He reached into his blazer and brought out the little gray flip phone I'd given him last fall, the one that looked too dull to matter. "I recorded something last night," he said, steady. He walked it to the clerk like a boy delivering a library book he knew would change a grade. The clip was less than half a minute, muffled by walls, but clear enough, Kendra's voice cool as ice water. "Once I have him back, the beach place is mine to sell, and the stipend starts. We can get out of this town." A man's laugh. Someone I did not recognize, oily, overconfident. "He'll adjust. Kids do." A scrape, a sigh, a cupboard door that sounded like anger when it closed. The air in the room changed temperature. No one coughed. No one moved. I watched Jonah's jaw. He didn't look at his mother or at me, only at the judge. If silence could be a sentence, that boy had learned to write it. I wish I could tell you the judge decided right then that a single recording tilted the whole room toward sense. But a courtroom is a place where even truth must line up and wait its turn. What I can tell you is how we reached that bench at all. The day after Aaron's funeral, the house smelled like rain and lilies that had lasted too long. I carried the casserole dishes neighbors had left to the kitchen and realized I did not own enough fridge. Cards collected on the entry table, polite as coats. I lit a candle beneath Aaron's photograph and sat hands idle on my lap, listening to the river throw itself against the bend beyond our yard. Grand Jonah's voice came small from the hallway. He patted in hair-damp socks speckled with dog fur. In his arms was Orbit, the stitched otter I'd bought him on a school trip when he was 6. He stood by the couch like a visitor waiting for permission. "Can I stay here?" For the night I asked, though we were both too tired to pretend that was the question. For a while he said, watching the candle's flame tip and steady, "I don't want to go back to Mom's." I did not ask why. There are questions that make a child pick their words like glass out of a cut. Instead, I patted the cushion and he leaned into me, all angles and elbows, and the ghost of the boy who used to fall asleep in the children's alcove while I closed up the library. We sat that way until the candle burned low. Later, I made cinnamon toast he barely ate. He asked if I thought his dad was somewhere he could still read. If there's any justice at all, I said there are books. He smiled with only one corner of his mouth the way Aaron used to when he disapproved of optimism, but wanted to be polite. Kendra arrived 3 days later without calling heels on my porch, a coat that swung like punctuation. She stepped inside as if my living room were a waiting room she'd paid for. "I'm taking Jonah," she said, eyes on the small suitcase by the stairs. "You've had your time." Jonah looked up from the coffee table where he was sorting my jar of buttons into little constellations. The blue one slipped out of his fingers, rolled, and hid under the couch. He came to stand behind me as if I were a door he could close. "You can see he's frightened," I said, keeping my voice even. "He's confused," she answered, arms folded. "You've made him that way." "Children understand presence," I said. "They do not understand absence." For a heartbeat, her mouth softened as if a memory had tried to get out. Then, whatever she'd brought to convince herself returned. She told me she'd be back Saturday. She said final the way people say finished when they mean I will not consider you. That night, my phone rang late. FaceTime. Jonah's face in darkness too close to the camera, the sort of picture children take when they want to be seen, not photographed. We whispered like conspirators, and then I noticed a shadow around his wrist, the yellow-brown bloom of something a kitchen table can't give you. "What happened, sweetheart?" I asked, and I tried not to pour urgency into the word what. He glanced away toward a door I could not see. "I bumped it," he said, and the lie sat there between us, shy and obedient. "I'm okay." We talked about other things, the stray cat that had learned our porch, the poster of the galaxy I'd left over his bed in the guest room, whether it would be unfair to name a snail even if you couldn't tell it from other snails. After we hung up, I took out the old ledger where I used to track donor books and wrote the time of the call, his words, the color of the bruise, the way his voice made room for someone else in the next room. Tuesday, 11:47 p.m., Jonah called. "Wrist discoloration right side, says okay, not okay. I did not yet call anyone." I wrote. Writing is a form of oxygen when the air thins out. 2 evenings later, he called again, this time from a tablet, whispering as if the walls might carry sound. He told me he hadn't slept, that the apartment smelled like someone else's perfume, that the hallway light stayed on all night, and the door to the balcony stuck. I wrote it all down. I began to date my notes with the weather too, because weather gives shape to memory fog at the bridge. Geese over the river, his voice smaller. The house had its own memory of boys. On a shelf in the closet, I kept a shoebox labeled with Aaron's terrible high school handwriting, "Do not open." I had never obeyed him. Inside were the magazine clippings he'd used to plan a bicycle trip. He never took a coil of orange string, a ferry schedule with a star next to 11:10 a.m. I left the box where it was and closed the closet door as if the past could be kept from noticing the present. On Friday afternoon, I stood at the sink, rinsing strawberries, when the screen in the front door banged, and Jonah ran in breathless with the weather on his jacket. "She's early," he said. Eyes wide, and then he went still. Kendra stepped in behind him, not winded at all. "I told you Saturday," I said. "It is Saturday," she said, meaning not the day, but that her patients had a calendar I'd failed to read. This time I did not bargain. I told her Jonah would not be pried off my porch like paint, not today. Her eyes flashed, then cooled, a woman remembering the room was not hers. She left with the promise that she would return with paperwork. We both knew paperwork is a word that can mean anything. I tucked Jonah into the guest room where the ceiling still wore sticky stars. I sat in the hallway with the light off and let the floorboards speak their old language. At some hour, the refrigerator muttered. At another, the river shouldered at the bank. When I could not stay still, I scrubbed a stain from the step no one else would ever see and put on water for tea I didn't drink. The ledger lay open on the table. I added 2 lines, careful and small. He asked to stay. I said yes. I will not tell you I had a plan. Plans are what people write when they already know. I had a notebook, a boy who trusted me with the truth he could bear to say, and a house that had held the sound of our family long enough to recognize a note that didn't fit. When the wind turned the chimes on the porch, gave a little shrug of music. I closed the ledger and waited for the kettle to hiss. By morning, the kettle's metal had cooled, the ledger lay closed, and the river put its shoulder to the bend like it always had. I was slicing a bruised pear when the doorbell rang, a polite single chime that didn't belong to anyone I knew. The man on the porch wore a rain-dark suit and careful shoes that had learned to avoid puddles. He held a leather portfolio like you'd carry a sleeping bird. "Mrs. Whitfield," he asked. "Yes, I'm Edmund Calder. Your son retained me for some estate matters about a year ago." He glanced past me, not rudely, just to make sure his words wouldn't land in the wrong ears. "May I come in?" I led him to the dining table and cleared a space between a vase of lilies and a bowl of buttons Jonah hadn't finished sorting. He set the portfolio down with the kind of respect some people save for hymnals, unclipped it, and slid out a sheaf of papers with blue flags bristling along the edges. "Mr. Whitfield updated his will last spring," Calder said. "He asked that I deliver this to you personally." I didn't move right away. The last time anyone delivered something to me in person, it had been a hospice nurse with a voice like tissue. I took the top page in both hands to keep it from trembling. The legal language made a city out of a family, all grids and numbers, but Calder's finger landed on a paragraph folded into the middle, like a note in a textbook. "Here," he said gently. In plain words, no marble in their mouths, Aaron had named the river house the lot, and the remaining savings as joint property for Jonah and me, with my guardianship over the whole and the boy until he turned 25. A trust for books and summer programs sat there, too modest but insistent. Beneath it a clause that seemed almost shy. "If there is contest the letter retained with this instrument." Calder reached into the portfolio again and produced a small sealed envelope, off-white and familiar, in a way that made my ribs ache. Aaron's handwriting tilted across the front, the same careful slant he had practiced when he was 12, and decided his signature should look like a pilot's. I broke the seal and unfolded one page. It wasn't long. Aaron never confused love with speech. He wrote about Jonah in sentences that did not apologize for being simple. He wrote about the house, how its noise had taught him to fall asleep as a boy, how the river had taught him that persistence was not the same as stubbornness. And then, because he was Aaron, he wrote, "If I'm not here, let Mom raise him. She listens without making me feel small. She will not mistake quiet for agreement." When I looked up, Calder had turned his eyes to the window. He took a breath that might have been relief. "There's also this," he said, sliding over a white USB stick, cheap and unassuming. "Mr. Whitfield asked me to keep a copy on file and to give one to you. He said, if it ever gets messy, show them this first. I haven't viewed it." "I will," I said, and the words felt like committing to the act of reading rather than to an argument. I placed the letter back into its envelope and tucked it under the corner of the ledger, as if paper could anchor paper. We heard the second car before we saw it gravel thrown aside, a door slammed too hard to be an accident. Calder's eyes flicked to mine. I stood. Kendra didn't wait for me to open the door. She pushed the screen back with 2 fingers and stepped over the threshold in one motion like a woman taking a stage she had rented by the hour. She wore black, but not the kind that absorbs light. This black reflected everything. "Who are you?" she asked Calder as if he'd left mud on the floor. He answered evenly with his card and a hand that did not retreat first. "Edmund Calder. I handled some of Aaron's paperwork." Her jaw tightened. "You're early," she said to me, which was not the word she meant. "I told you I would be back Saturday. Jonah's coming with me. There is a way certain people say with me that sounds like from you." I didn't respond to that part. Instead, I moved so that I was between her and the hallway, so that if Jonah decided to come stand behind me, he wouldn't have to decide at all. "We're in the middle of a conversation," I said because it was true. Kendra's gaze landed on the documents, then lifted to my face like a match flaring. "What is that?" "Estate matters," Calder said, careful as a man placing china on a narrow shelf. "His estate," she repeated with a laugh she did not accompany with joy. "You mean the house, the river, the funds? You think you're going to—" She stopped catching whatever she shouldn't say before it could incriminate her tone. "We'll sort this in court. Then we'll sort it there," I said. She looked at me the way a cat looks at glass with intention not understanding. "I'm taking my son." "Jonah is in school," I said, which was also true. It was late morning, a bell would ring soon, and he would stand up and move to the next room with a kind of obedient sorrow schools train even in the happiest kids. "You can see him this afternoon." She took one step closer. I smelled perfume and coffee. "Don't get righteous with me, Nora. Don't pretend this is about anything other than you not being able to let go. I did not say I had buried a husband and a son and that letting go was a language I knew too fluently. I did not say the ledger was full of times and notes because I had learned that memory is persuasive only when it can prove its alibi. I said, "We'll be ready at 3. She left with her chin high. The screen door banged like punctuation. Calder exhaled. He gathered the papers, arranged them with the neatness of someone who has watched Temper's erase sequence and slid them back into the portfolio. "If you need me," he said, "call." I asked him for a pen before he went. On the will's duplicate, just beneath Aaron's signature, I wrote the date and the phrase, "received with witness present." It wasn't necessary. It made me feel steadier anyway. At 3:30, Kendra returned. She parked in my driveway as if she were demonstrating a point you could measure. Jonah's backpack was already in her trunk, but he walked to the porch and hugged me openly, not like a child sneaking an extra cookie. When they drove away, Orbit the otter's ear poked out of the zipper like a white flag someone hadn't committed to waving. The weather changed as the afternoon closed, clouds low air grained with damp. I straightened the living room twice and folded the blanket once. When the rain began, it began honest not with a warning spit but with a sheet. At a little past midnight, the door this time, the wood not the bell, shook under small knuckles. I was already awake. When I opened it, the night came in first, and Jonah behind it soaked from scalp to sock. The otter was pressed between his ribs and the backpack strap as if fabric could take a blow. Granny said, and his teeth clicked on the word. I pulled him inside. The puddles he made could have been measured in spoonfuls. The kitchen towel I wrapped around his shoulders could not stay ahead. I set the kettle on the burner and talked to keep the air warm. "Hang your jacket there." "Shoes by the mat. We'll dry Orbit in the oven on the lowest setting like he's a biscuit." He made a sound that might have wanted to be a laugh if it had been given more time. I gave him a sweatshirt that belonged to Aaron at 16 soft, with the arguments a washing machine has with cotton, and we sat at the table with our hands around mugs, as if heat could be persuaded up through our palms. "Do you want to tell me anything?" I asked. He shook his head. "Just don't make me go back." I nodded. We did not bargain with the night. I led him to the guest room, wiped his hair with the towel again because the act felt like punctuation, and left the door half open. The river's hush moved through the house, plight his breathing. They came with morning, not sirens, but a car that was blue enough for anybody to recognize it. The cruiser idled at the end of the driveway. The officer who stepped out had the posture of someone whose father taught him to stand straight. Kendra arrived on the passenger side, her lipstick perfect in a way that felt like an accusation. I met them on the porch. The officer had a clipboard and the kind of calm voice people learn in rooms with training posters. "Ma'am," he said, "we've had a report of a juvenile who didn't return home last night." "Is Jonah here?" "He is," I said. "He arrived wet and frightened around midnight. I made him tea and put him to bed." Kendra pushed forward. "She took him," she told the officer. "She's been manipulating him for weeks." I did not look at her. I stepped back into the doorway. "Jonah." I called not loudly. He appeared almost immediately, as if he had been waiting in the hall with his ear against the seam. The officer looked at him. "Son, can you tell me what happened?" Jonah's fingers found the seam of my cardigan the way a rock climber finds a good crack. He swallowed and lifted his chin. "I came here," he said, "on my own." Kendra scoffed. "He's 12. Which means he can speak," the officer said. and the tiny tilt of his mouth suggested he'd been 12 once too. He turned back to Jonah. Did your grandmother take you from your residence? No, Jonah said louder. Grandma didn't kidnap me. The officer nodded, the kind of nod that says a thing has been heard even if it hasn't been solved. He asked us both to write statements. We did my simple account with Times, Jonah's with the blunt vocabulary of a child who has learned the weight of words by lifting them. When the officer left, he did not take Jonah. He left a card with a number for family court and a request that we all remain reachable. Kendra stood on the gravel long enough to let the rain decide whose face it wanted to run down, then drove away without looking back. The house exhaled. I sent Jonah to the bathroom to warm his hands under water until they felt like they belonged to him again. Then I went to the study and wrestled the bottom drawer of the old desk open. Behind a stack of tax folders and a shoebox of Polaroids, there was the green cash box Martin had kept receipts in when he ran the bait shop. Its corners nicked its lock, more symbolic than secure. Inside, under a book of stamps and $2 bills that had wanted to be saved, sat exactly what I didn't know I was looking for. One more envelope in Aaron's hand, and tucked with it a memory card taped to a note. Play together, he'd written. Don't be alone when you watch me. I called Jonah in. We sat on the rug with the old laptop and propped the computer on a stack of gardening catalogs. The video bloomed on screen without ceremony, no titles, no edits. The camera had been set on the picnic table. The lens stared through the porch post to the yard. It was summer in the image. Even the light smelled warm. Aaron walked into frame with Jonah nearly a head shorter than now, both of them barefoot, both damp from the hose. Aaron scooped him up, spun him once, then faced the camera, and almost as an afterthought spoke. If anything ever takes me out of the room, he said. Not grandly, I want a record of what I already told the people who matter. Jonah belongs with Mom. She knows how to listen. He paused and looked down at the boy in his arms, kissed the top of his wet hair, and added, We're okay, buddy. The clip ended when the wind pushed a maple leaf across the lens, and the world became a patchwork of green. We didn't say much after. I closed the laptop like a lid and sat still. Jonah leaned his shoulder into mine the way a child tests the strength of a fence before he climbs it. Would it help? I asked eventually to have a place to put things you don't want to carry in your body. He frowned. Like where? In a recording, I said, reaching for the drawer where we kept mismatched batteries and the more mysterious needs of a household. I pulled out an old music player, one of the narrow ones with a wheel that Aaron had used when he ran the bluff trail. It still powered on after a little coaxing. You can talk into this when you want. Or not talk. You can record the room or the rain or Orbit snoring. We can label them by weather if you like, fog, sun, wind. And if anyone asks, it's just for songs. He turned the device over in his hands, curiosity brightening his face from the inside. Will it save? He asked, practical. It will. Can it hide? I smiled a little. We can make it look boring. We set it up at the kitchen table. He made a first brief entry, his name, the date, the fact that the tea this morning tasted like cinnamon and safety, and then immediately wanted to erase it. Was self-conscious. I told him he could. He didn't. We tucked the player into a hollowed-out paperback mystery on the shelf where no one would pick it up unless they wanted Chapter 10 to fall out. Rain softened into a seam along the porch. I fried eggs and we ate them with salt and too much pepper because that's how Aaron had done it, and continuity is a kind of seasoning. After dishes, Jonah wandered to the back door and pressed his forehead against the glass, looking out at the lawn where the river swollen by the storm had swallowed the low path. Can I go look? He asked. Boots, I said. We stood under the porch roof and watched branches hurry by on their way to the sea. The air smelled like mud and pine. Jonah told me about a project in science, how his teacher had let him choose between erosion and space, and he'd picked erosion because it felt honest. Then he said he missed the library's old globe and how my finger would stop the spinning with Ecuador under it because it felt good to say. Back inside, I found a 3-ring binder in the closet and slipped the officer's card in the sleeve at the front. I added a printed copy of Aaron's letter, the will duplicate, and the notes I'd made in the ledger copied in a hand that a stranger could read. Not a plan. A record. Paper remembers even when people would rather not. Afternoon brought a brief stripe of sun across the dining table that made the lilies glow from the inside. Jonah dozed on the couch with Orbit damp drying on his chest, the music player tucked in the pocket of the sweatshirt. I sat in the armchair with the binder closed and the USB still warm from my hand. The house had resumed its ordinary catalog of noises, the tick of the oven as it cooled, the small protest of a cooling pipe, the cedar siding answering the wind. When Jonah woke, he asked if we could bake something, anything, as long as he got to crack the eggs. We made a pan of cornbread that broke wrong at the edges and right in the middle. We ate it with honey and the patience cornbread requires. When the day thinned into evening again, I walked him upstairs and switched on the lamp with the busted shade I had never managed to replace. He lay down and held Orbit above his face as if the otter were a moon. "Will you sit?" he asked. I sat. He closed his eyes and his mouth parted the way children's mouths do when sleep crosses the threshold and forgets to knock. I listened to his breath and the river and to the light tapping of a branch against the bedroom window, and I let the ledger remain shut on the kitchen table because some things don't need immediate ink. Downstairs, the laptop waited. So did the binder. The rain had spent itself. The house kept its own counsel. I rinsed the cups and turned them upside down to dry, wiped the crumbs into my palm, and carried them to the sink, where I watched them vanish piece by piece in the water. The rain spent itself by morning and left the yard ribbed with worm castings and a glimmer on the porch rail. Jonah ate his eggs and quieted the music player in the pouch of Aaron's old sweatshirt, Orbit propped like a small judge on the chair beside him. After dishes, I walked him to school and watched him join a line of children who already knew where to put their eyes when adults were measuring them. He turned once at the door and lifted 2 fingers the way Aaron had when I'd leave him at the bus. "I'm here." I lifted mine back. "I see you." In the hours between the bell and the bell, I built the binder out of patient sleeves labeled by date, then by weather as we'd agreed. I added the officer's card, a printed transcript of Aaron's letter, a copy of the will with Edmund's notation, the narrow column of notes from my ledger that recorded only what could stand up straight. When my hand cramped, I made tea, and when the kettle sighed, I let it. At 3, I was early to the curb. The principal's secretary stood in the doorway like a person guarding an aisle seat. Jonah came out with his backpack zipped all the way for once. In the car, he asked if he could record the windshield wipers. He liked the sound when they found the end of their own path and had to start again. We drove home to the river, to the cedar, to the porch where the wind knocked once and then apologized. Kendra called after dinner. There is a tone some people reserve for telephones and customer service, ready, reasonable, infinitely repeatable. "Jonah will spend the weekend at my apartment," she said. "We can discuss holidays through counsel." "Do you have counsel?" I asked. "Soon," she said, and hung up in a way that asked you to consider the definition of soon. Jonah heard only the word weekend. He put Orbit on his lap and tied a shoelace he didn't need to tie. I told him I would drive him in the morning. I told him kindly. I told him like a woman who planned her fear into lists. It rained again on Saturday. Jonah packed his things carefully, then unpacked to make sure Orbit had the spare button that served as an eye if the first one broke loose. On the way, he asked if I would keep the music player charged, and whether weather names would still count if he was somewhere else. "They count if you say they count," I said. Kendra's building had a hedged border and clean gravel. The glass at the entry showed me my own face in the moment, just before I smoothed it. Jonah hugged me under the awning and went in. The door latched with that swift, expensive sound I've never liked, the one that compliments itself. The first video came that night, late, the angle low and sideways, like the way a child peeks around a doorframe. The room was Jonah's familiar poster of the galaxy, with a tear in Andromeda, the slat of light from the hallway. Kendra's voice entered the frame first, not the person, just the heat of her words. "You're not going to your grandmother for every little thing she said. You hear me? We are not doing that." He said something I couldn't hear. "You want to make me the villain?" she asked, and then a cupboard closed hard on a question. The clip broke when his thumb slid over the lens. He sent it to the secure inbox on my computer, the one Edmund had helped me set up when Aaron's diagnosis forced efficiency upon us. I dated it, saved it twice, transcribed the parts I could, and wrote what I could verify voice raised. Kitchen cabinet, timestamp 11:42, rain, audible on sill. On Sunday, I made soup for no one and took the binder out and put it away and took it out again. I read old circulation cards from the library to steady my mind. Dickens' Great Expectations Due 412. A habit as useless and necessary as watering plants in a drought. Near noon, the phone rang with a number I didn't know. "This is Maya Chen," the voice said. "Family law. Edmund asked if I might take your call." I hadn't made one. He must have. I told Maya what I had told my ledger, but slower, so a stranger could carry it without losing a step. When I mentioned the video, she interrupted me gently. "Don't send anything by email," she said. "Not yet. Hold the originals, keep a log. If anyone in authority asks you, provide selectively, paper first, then pixels. We'll request what we need." "We" is premature, I said, and heard the old librarian in it. "Perhaps," she said, "or perhaps not." "May I come by tomorrow?" She did. She sat at my table with her hair wet from the walk up the slope and took notes on a pad of thick paper that made a soft consonant when her pen moved. She looked like a person who had learned to balance the 2 halves of a scale with her body. When she'd read enough to orient herself, we drove to Jonah's school and asked to see the counselor. The counselor was a woman with sparrow bones and the sort of kindness that fools people into thinking she cannot lift. She did not show us her files, but she told us she had them. She did not tell us what she had written, but she told us she had written. We left with her card and the sense of another careful human making a parallel list. Maya filed a petition for mediation. The courthouse sent us a data room number and a reminder to bring only what could be put on the table in an hour. I pressed my clothes into good order and brought the binder. Jonah waited in the school library. I could feel his presence from 2 blocks away, like a person can tell rain before the first dark leaf flips. The mediation room smelled like lemon and tiredness. The mediator wore a tie borrowed from happier work. Kendra arrived with a lawyer whose lapel pin required you to guess at its meaning. She sat with her hands folded on a clutch and her eyes full but not with tears. The mediator asked for statements. Kendra spoke first. "I want peace," she said. "I want my son back in a routine. He has been encouraged to view me through someone else's eyes." When it was my turn, I said only what the binder could say if it had a voice. I passed across copies not originals and kept my face quiet. "Do you have recordings?" the mediator asked Maya. "Yes," Maya said. "They can be authenticated. We will reserve them for a hearing." The mediator nodded like a man who had seen enough furniture to assemble anything. "Let's try a schedule," he said. "Alternate weekends, dinners midweek, no disparagement in either home." Kendra's lawyer wanted a different arrangement. Jonah 5 days with her, 2 with me. Holidays every other year. Summers hers unless Jonah enrolled in a program requiring him to be here. Maya declined with a softness that cut like a new blade. "We can't agree," she said. "Not with what we have." So we left without a signature and with the knowledge of what the room could not hold. In the parking lot, a cloud moved off the sun like someone had unplugged the day. I drove home past the bluff where the river shoulders rocks around the bend, the way a big man shoulders through a bar crowd carefully but without apology. That evening, Jonah sent a second video, shorter, the sound, half wind, half breath. The camera trembled. He must have been holding it under a blanket. A plate broke somewhere else in the apartment. Kendra's voice came thin through walls. "I am not your enemy. Do you hear me? But you are making me one." I added it to the record and then stopped adding for a moment and sat down because a person must choose where to put the weight of a thing. I put it where my hands could hold it, and then I stood up again and did the next right task, which was to make the bed in the guest room, because there are acts you do whether or not there is the company. The week turned and the paperwork multiplied, the way lilacs do when you forget to cut them back. Maya filed a motion asking for temporary orders. Kendra's lawyer filed one that read like a biography in which I had never been born. The judge granted status quo pending hearing, which meant Jonah stayed primarily with his mother with visitation by agreement. An officer delivered the order in the afternoon and apologized with his eyes while he refused to apologize with his mouth. Kendra arrived that evening and stood in my living room with the document in her hand like a sheriff in an old film. Jonah lifted Orbit and kissed the stitched nose as if it were a sacrament. He hugged me and did not say anything in front of her, which is a kind of courtesy that costs a child. After the door closed, my phone pinged once, then again. First a still image, Jonah's palm holding the music player like a talisman. Then a line of text he must have typed from the back seat, "I'll keep recording." A minute later, "I love you, Gran. I'll be okay. And then if you need me to say anything, I will." I did not answer the last line. I typed back only what I could promise. "I love you. I see you." Then I set the phone down and went to the sink and washed the 2 cups we had used and let the water run longer than necessary so the sound could argue with what the house had to say. It was Edmund who brought the next piece not by plan but by knowing the city's smaller doors. "The building's exterior cameras are motion activated," he told Maya in my dining room, flipping to a page he'd obtained from a public records request that deserved a better name. "The lobby keeps a 24-hour loop. I've secured copies of a few nights. We watched with the impersonal patient's footage requires a timestamp. A lobby painted the color of weather, a plant that had never been in danger from anyone's neglect. At 11:18 p.m. on a Thursday, the elevator opened. Kendra walked out in a dress meant to be noticed. She checked her lipstick in the black of the elevator door. She did not look down the hall where Jonah's room would have been. A sedan pulled to the curb. A man stepped out and touched the small of her back with the familiar ease of a person who uses the same finger to ring the same bell. They left. No child. The elevator doors closed. The lobby continued to be the kind of empty that feels complicated. "Do we know if Jonah was alone?" Maya asked. "Not from this," Edmund said, "but the superintendent's overnight log shows no registered sitter." Maya nodded and wrote 2 words on her pad pattern, neglect, and drew a line between them as if connecting dots made a picture more willing to be looked at. That night, Jonah's recording was of tap water and the sound you make when you try not to cry with your mouth closed. I labeled it Plumbing Late and placed it between Wind Porch and Wiper School Run. The binder swelled in its rings. The music player took a charge and gave it back. When the hearing date arrived, it wore the weather of any other day. The courthouse steps had been worn by more arguments than our small town should have needed, but the stone didn't resent it. In the hallway outside Department 5, Jonah sat between me and Maya with his knees close and his hands folded on top of the music player as if to keep it from singing. Kendra stood with her lawyer down the hall beneath a painting of a ship that had never docked here. Edmund arrived with a folded printout and the white USB in his palm, as if small things should be held like wildlife. The clerk opened the door and called a case number I had practiced forgetting so that I would recognize it. The room was square and lit and unkind to people who prefer lamplight. I touched Jonah's shoulder, then let my hands return to their own lap. The judge took the bench, the calendar moved, the clock did what clocks do. The bailiff's voice when he spoke was the voice of a person who has learned that form is its own kind of shelter. We stood. The sound of chairs settling was the only sound that chose us for its audience. I placed the binder on the table and opened it to the first sleeve. Jonah kept his eyes on the wood grain that ran like a river across the council table, steady and indifferent. The world reduced itself to what could be said out loud. The clerk called our case, and the room settled into the kind of listening you cannot buy. Judge Valdez looked over the file, then at the three of us at council table. Kendra sat with her lawyer 2 rows back, spine straight, mouth arranged into patience. Maya rose first. She didn't announce anything. She placed the binder on the evidence cart, opened it to the index, and walked the judge through pages, like stepping stones, dates, transcriptions, the officer's card, Edmund's notation on the will, my ledger entries copied in a hand anyone could read. When she finished, she held up the white USB as if it were ordinary plastic, which it was, and therefore harder to argue with. Kendra's lawyer objected in a voice that preferred echo. Foundation hearsay, authentication, Your Honor. We haven't seen chain of custody. You will, Maya said, and produced the affidavit Edmund had drafted along with the letter Aaron had written and entrusted to his attorney. She didn't linger on sentiment. She let the lines do their own work. Judge Valdez read long enough for the room to rearrange its breathing. I'll admit the letter for weight, not truth, she said, and I'll hear limited excerpts from recordings that can be authenticated. I also want to hear from the child briefly in open court if he wishes. Jonah looked at me, then at the music player in his palms. I can speak, he said, and his voice didn't wobble. The judge nodded. Come forward, Mr. Whitfield. He stood at the small lectern. Up close, he looked younger and older at once, the way children do when they've carried something heavy the right distance. Judge Valdez leaned forward softer now. Jonah, do you feel safe living with your grandmother? He swallowed. Yes. Do you feel safe living with your mother as things are now? He took a breath that sounded like deciding. No. Is there anything else you want me to know? He glanced at Maya. She stepped to the cart, offered the small player we'd disguised as a music stick, and passed up a set of headphones. This is from last night, Your Honor, she said. Recorded in the child's room. Original file preserved, metadata attached. Kendra's lawyer objected again. The judge overruled limited purpose. The room went quiet in the particular way that means sound is traveling elsewhere. The judge listened, eyes on the middle distance. When she removed the headphones, she didn't look at either table first. She looked at Jonah. Thank you, she said simply. Maya spoke again, shorter this time. She offered the lobby footage Edmund had obtained, time-stamped at 11:18 p.m., and the superintendent's overnight log noting no sitter on duty. She pointed to the counselor's letter of concern, not content, not conclusions only, that it existed, and had existed for some time. She returned to her seat. Kendra's lawyer rose and built a narrative of misunderstanding, stress, grief, a grandmother who could not forgive time for moving forward. He said the recordings were one-sided, that angry moments flatten good ones. He asked for a schedule that would restore normalcy. When he finished, no one spoke for a beat. You could hear the building. You could hear an old fluorescent decide whether to hum. Then Judge Valdez folded her hands. I have reviewed the filings, she said, and I have considered the testimony and what I've just heard. She paused. Custody cases are not referendums on anyone's character. They are decisions about a child's safety and stability. She looked at Jonah again, then at me, then at the page where she'd made notes I couldn't see. The court orders sole legal and physical custody to Mrs. Whitfield. The mother will have professionally supervised visitation for now, with review in 90 days upon proof of engagement with a counselor approved by Family Services. No disparagement from either home and all exchanges through the supervised center. I am also issuing a no-contact order as to the third party referenced in last night's recording. The bailiff said, All rise, but we were already standing in the way you stand when something inside you finds a place to set itself down. Kendra's lawyer leaned toward her, speaking quickly. She remained very still, as if stillness could change vocabulary. In the corridor, Maya squeezed my shoulder once and went to file copies. Edmund pressed the USB into my palm even though he knew I had the duplicate. Jonah and I walked outside without deciding to. The day had the clear, rinsed light that happens after weather admits it has done enough. On the sidewalk, a cart sold cocoa from a silver urn. I bought one for Jonah and held the hot paper of it while he blew across the surface like a scientist. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The river below the courthouse sounded exactly like the river at home. We drove back along the bluff. The house answered the door with its usual creak. Jonah carried Orbit upstairs and came down bareheaded, hair still flattened from where the headphones had pressed. "Can we paint?" he asked. We could. We did. The room had been a sleep color. We made it a sky color. He chose a stripe for the wall over the desk, a narrow band the shade of the river just before evening. While the second coat dried, we took the globe down from the library shelf and spun it once. My finger stopped on Maine for no reason other than its outline pleased me. He laughed at that, a real one, quick and round. The music player went back into its hollowed book. We didn't erase anything. We didn't listen either. It was enough to know the files had weight in a place designed to measure. 2 days later, Ms. Alvarez from Family Services came by. She sat on the couch and asked Jonah where he liked to read what breakfast tasted like here, whether Orbit had a bedtime. She looked at me and at the binder on the shelf closed. She stamped a form and tucked it away. We walked her to the porch. She remarked on the rosemary, and I offered a sprig for her pocket. When she left the house, resumed its ordinary voice. Eudora from next door brought a casserole the size of a map. She didn't ask questions. She left with 2 daffodil bulbs and a promise to return for tea when she wasn't in her gardening clothes, though I told her gardening clothes were the only ones I liked to see. Edmund came by with a shoebox of documents and departed lighter. Maya stopped in late, hair damp from the mist, and told us the supervised center had space beginning next week. She didn't stay. Good lawyers know when to let a room be only a room. That weekend, Jonah and I walked the margin, where the river had finally let the path reappear. We found a length of green glass rounded as a stone and took it home to live on the windowsill. He helped me set Pease his thumb exactly the right size to press a seed to depth. When he straightened, he looked at the yard, like a cartographer not merely seeing, but naming. Upstairs, I opened the drawer with the green cash box and took out Aaron's letter. I read it once more. Then I called Grace the notary at the feed store who has stamped half this town into validity and asked her to stop by. We amended my will with a small addition. When the house passes, it will carry a covenant for a modest fund library card's camp fees, a bus ticket for a child who needs a quiet place to land. We called it the Harbor Fund because a name has power when it points toward where you mean to dock. The day of Jonah's first supervised visit, we drove to the center with the windows cracked. He held Orbit in a paperback mystery. I dropped him at the door and waited in the car with my hands open on my knees. When he came back out an hour later, he was neither destroyed nor gleeful. He was Jonah. We stopped for bread on the way home. He chose a loaf with a crust that dared your teeth. Spring leaned in. On the far bank, cottonwoods shook out new leaves like slips returned to their envelopes. We strung a line of bulb lights under the porch, not in celebration, just because evening benefits from gentler edges. A few neighbors came by with bowls and stories. Ms. Alvarez brought deviled eggs wrapped in wax paper. Edmund accepted lemonade as if it were something more ceremonial. No toasts. The sound of forks found its own speech. Jonah dozed in the grass with Orbit's stitched tail peeking from beneath his arm. When he woke, he stood, walked to me, and pressed his forehead into my shoulder. No words, just the small weight of belonging. The light softened. The river did what rivers do. I stacked plates, he stacked cups, and together we carried them inside the door, easing shut behind us as if it had learned our timing. The house held our steps and gave them back to us. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.